day that we honor the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We know so much, and we know even some of the books that he wrote and were written about him. I remember years ago reading a book by Lawrence D. Reddick about the Montgomery bus boycott. And then after Dr. King was assassinated, I read more about the pessimistic mood of the movement. Many people characterize Dr. King as a gifted preacher who moralized the plight of American blacks in simple terms, but failed in the broader economic and political aspect for reform. I don't know how true that is, but that's what I read. Today we learn a lot about him, and I hope that I could maybe share something new with you. I remember something that maybe you all didn't know, maybe you did, that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother was playing the piano in the Ebenezer Baptist Church the day after I went there to see it as a tourist. I just wanted to see the Ebenezer Baptist Church in July of 1974. And the next day was Sunday. I remember that very vividly. And over the news, we heard that a deranged gunman had come in there and killed her. And killed other people having worship in the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Most people forgot that. I forgot it for the longest time. And the other thing that we forgot is how there's a batch of files that were released by J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, how closely they were surveilling him, more than anybody had suspected. And then there's Dr. Martin Luther King's widow, Coretta Scott King. And I had a remembrance of being up on the stage with her at one time. And I just happened to mention that I heard that she was a big force in encouraging him to come out against the war in Vietnam. I wanted to thank her if she was that person. And this was when we were doing the Jobs, Peace, and Freedom 20th anniversary march in 1983. And she said, by the way, when Coretta Scott King speaks, flies don't fly. You listen, everybody. And she says, young man, come here. So I come over. She said, I see that you worked in Haiti. I had my Haiti work team shirt on. She said, when you were there, did you see any babies and young children with distended bellies? Yes, I did. Did you ever see, when you were there in Haiti, the adults were very, very thin? I said, yes, I did. She said, well, those aspects are violence. That's violence that you looked at. That's what you have to oppose. That kind of violence as well as others. So violence in any form has to be addressed and opposed. I never forgot it. How could you? It was Coretta Scott King who said it. Well, the history of Dr. King was so vast in the short time that he lived. He graduated from Boston University with a PhD. And years later, they discovered that he had plagiarized some of his dissertation. As I said, J. Edgar Hoover was constantly following him. And he even got Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, to sign off on the surveillance of Dr. King to see if there was any communist infiltration, which there was none, but he had gotten that permission by Robert Kennedy, his boss, and that was a lot of trouble in and of itself, because they surveilled every aspect that Dr. King went, in hotel rooms, in his office, in his house. Oh, it was bad. It was really bad. Well, we all know the story. It's one that we wish we didn't have to know. And in November 2nd, 1983, in the Rose Garden of the White House, President Ronald Reagan signed the legislation which made Martin Luther King Jr. Day a national holiday. And he signed that over the objections of 22 senators who said, "You're out of your mind." But in a time period, President Reagan had some difficulties of his own, and his staff felt this could be deflecting the other problems about Iran-Contra. So sign it and make it the day that they all want. Well, whatever the reason, it's okay. And we all know that he was great, but which great king are we honoring? Is it the one that the voting rights advocate, Dr. King? Is it the anti-poverty campaign, Dr. King? Was the opposition to the war in Vietnam, Dr. King? Was it his advocacy of integration, Dr. King? And on and on and on. The proof and the price of his success is that everyone wanted and still wants a piece of him. And it remains without question that he was the visionary leader of the civil rights movement. And we celebrate tomorrow's his 95th birthday. What would have been? No other single person in the history of our nation has been designated a national holiday. One person. Sadly, I have to tell you something. By the way, when we were there, it was really quite a thing. It was a who's who, a virtual who's who of people. The Reverend Joseph Lowry was there, Mahalia Jackson, Charlton Heston, Bob Dylan, Peter, Paul, and Mary. Daddy King was there, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, the Reverend Andrew Young. I mean, it was a virtual who's who of civil rights people who worked. Thurgood Marshall was there, so was Sandra Day O'Connor. 49 states ratified the day to be a national holiday for Dr. King, and only one held out. But John McCain said to Coretta Scott King that he would work tirelessly to get those no votes in Arizona to become yes votes, and true to his word, he did it. The referendum was presented, and throughout all of the nation, it was Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Sadly, I have to tell you, one state took its yes vote and turned it into a no vote. They decided, nope, we're not going to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We're going to honor, you'll never would believe this, we're going to honor Robert E. Lee, the daughters of the American Revolution and the daughters of the Confederate States got together and made all these wonderful statues, parentheses around the word wonderful, and they did it about 60 years after the Civil War. And there were of Confederate leaders who wanted to give the message that the South shall rise again. Well, they were enraged that the country is moving away from those statues, and you got to take them down. Well, they were enraged about that, and at least Mississippi, they said, is going to honor a Confederate leader. The governor of Mississippi declared not January 15th, but January 19th is going to be the day that the great state of Mississippi is going to remember General Robert E. Lee, because that's his birthday. Now, there's two problems with that. The first problem is that the bill that became law in Mississippi is mean-spirited. Robert E. Lee never once stepped foot in the state of Mississippi. True. Voters decided they would honor a man with this kind of baggage in history who had no personal connection to the state of Mississippi. Truth is, stranger than fiction, solely on the basis of his track record to want to preserve slavery, as well as his kinship with white superiority, the good people of Mississippi threw down the gauntlet, and today they remain just as committed to divide this nation. For all practical and basic reasons, General Robert E. Lee became a traitor to the United States of America. Abraham Lincoln asked him to lead the troops against the Confederates, and he said no. There were 36 states at the time. Now, he was highly educated at West Point, but he had some emotional reasons for why he loved the North and the South, and, well, he wasn't going to go against the land that he loved. The penalty for this kind of conduct and not answering your country's call is treason, and it's it's death by hanging. But Dr. King emerged as a reluctant, prominent figure, as well as these things just kind of like fell on him. He was a Baptist minister, and he became the voice of the oppressed, advocating for equality, justice, and peace. And he continued to inspire people against blatant racism and discrimination from Jim Crow laws. Every year, we find ourselves examining the life of this person. And you know most of it. He was born January 15th, 1929. He was raised in a middle-class family. His father loved Martin Luther of the Reformation, and one day in 1934 went down to the courthouse and had his own name and his son's name changed from Martin Luther, from Michael King Sr. and Michael King Jr. to Martin Luther King Sr. and Martin Luther King Jr. That was 1934. So the person we honor was originally Michael King Jr. Now, King emerged a prominent leader during the Montgomery bus boycott in bus 2857. Now, we know exactly what happened. Rosa Parks did not get up. Now, Dr. King had nothing to do with any of that, by the way. But she decided not to get up. It was part of the movement. She was the kind of, well, call her Jackie Robinson of the civil rights era. She won't fight back. Not fighting back is a lot harder than fighting back. And the man who drove the bus had the law on his side. I guarantee you, there's not a person in this room. I mean, you could floor me if you got the answer. What's his name? What's the bus driver's name who had the law on his side? Nobody has that answer. And sometimes when I'm dealing with younger people, I say, I've got $20 here for anybody that can tell me the name of the bus driver who had the law on his side and called the police because she wouldn't get up. Now, the reason that the Montgomery bus boycott happened, they tried, Dr. King tried, to have some kind of negotiation. They had an idea that, okay, let's compromise. The front of the bus will be for whites, and they fill them up, and if there's room, some blacks can sit in there as well. And the back of the bus could be where people of color can get on the bus, and then they could sit there, and if the white came on, he could sit, or she could sit in that area. Well, it seemed like a good idea until they said no. No? What do you mean no? Well, then they said, okay, now we're going for full press. We want complete integration. I didn't know that they had tried to do some kind of compromise there. But the bus company felt, nah, we're not going to budge. Well, they did budge after a year or so. And Dr. King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. He had a way with words. And one of his most memorable moments, you know it, August 28, 1963, when he said very clearly, I have a dream. Mahalia Jackson was sitting like over there, and he's speaking. They were all given 6 minutes to speak. He took 18. Yeah. And he was speaking, and she says, Martin, tell him about the dream. He was going to be almost the last speaker. It was late. People were tired. And she said, tell him about the dream. And so all of a sudden, in cadence, he took off. He said, I want you to know that I still have a dream. Well, none of that is in his original text. Not one bit of it. Because that part of that sermon was preached a week ago in Detroit at the church where Aretha Franklin's father was the pastor. It was surprising that he was able to just take off. And he enabled himself, emboldened himself to become known as one of the most electrifying speakers in the country from that point on. Mind you, he was at that point 33 years old. Very, very, we're left with a memory, a very good memory, but a sober memory of his short life. And we can't much more than admire what he's accomplished in such a short time. Now, the media watched him. They watched him as ferociously as they could because everybody thought he would be next. President John F. Kennedy was killed, and people thought for sure the dogs, the bombs, the Klansmen, the segregationists, the legal and political authority, they're coming after him. So they watched him, and they followed him, and people made it really hard for him. There was a man named Bull Connor, who was the peace officer, a strange title for somebody like that, wielding political authority. And he was very brutal in his treatment of nonviolent civil disobedience because the constituents wanted him to be brutal. And he kept Dr. King in prison longer than he had any right to. In fact, he would taunt Dr. King and say, "Well, where's your buddy Kennedy now? Where's the Kennedy boys now? I don't see them here." They kept, they could do whatever they want. They wouldn't allow him to have pen or paper while he was in prison because they have every right to not give him those things. So his lawyers had to sneak those things in. Oh my goodness. Well, as he was there, how many people here have ever read Letter from a Birmingham Jail? Anybody? You did it. Oh, praise you, praise all of you. Well, that's the most significant document in the history of civil rights. It was the definitive account. And how did that come about? A couple of Methodist bishops and 6 others from other denominations in Birmingham said, "You got to get out of Dodge. You got to get out of here." And they took out a full-page ad in the Birmingham Post. Get out. We're trying to do some work, and they were. But his letter was so profound that he wrote back to them on the corners of newspapers that his lawyers brought in. Now, the truth is, he finished it once he was out of jail. But he answered those 8 clergymen. And I always point it out because one of those bishops, was the father of the president of Drew University when I was there. And at that time, we were trying to get Drew University to divest its funding from South Africa. Same reason. And I met with him, with a group, and said, "It appears to me, Dr. Hardin," that was his name, "that you're doing Daddy proud." I reminded everybody of his father. That his father was one of those signatures of the 8 clergy who took out that ad telling Dr. King to get out of town. And everyone else felt that Dr. King should leave. Why? Because he was using children. Can you believe that? The theory was that using children, they could miss a day of school. But people who were adults had to miss a day of work, and then they might lose their jobs, etc. Well, I must say the efficiency with which he rolled was something to behold. And he announced with bold and clear rhetoric on December 20th, 1956, that the arc of the moral universe, although long, is bending toward justice. Well, the next morning he became one of the greatest, or I should say a household name, because there he was, sitting in the front row with a white man in the first bus that rolled off with a new integration policy, that there was no question of the basis of color for sitting on any of the seats or standing because somebody else was there and had to sit in their place. Now, I must say that this it's a great thing that these triumphs happen, but not without any personal price. Dr. King's home was bombed. The police would harass people. They did carpooling. And just to make life difficult for them, they would break one of the lights and say, "Oh, your light is broken. You can't drive this car anymore." And just to make it difficult for them. If you read, and I'm going to give you your homework assignment. You think this is just something where you come and listen? Well, please read the most profound document ever written by Dr. King or by anybody. At least that's what Robert Kennedy said when he read it. A letter from a Birmingham jail succinctly stated exactly what the people should know, what the whole issue was about. And it's very basically stated. He said, I could wait, except for when my daughter asked, why can't I go to Funtown, the amusement park, because of the basis of her color. Well, he pressed on. And so pressing on, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was formulated in 1957, he together collaborated to have a march. And President Kennedy said, this is going to be the worst mistake of your life. You shouldn't do such a march because it will alienate people from the favorable impressions that you have been building up. Well, the result, though, is it's the most celebrated demonstration in American history. He made a couple of right calls, Dr. King. He encouraged President Johnson to somehow enact the civil rights legislation that brought about the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, the 1968 Equal Housing Rights Act. All of it before he died, and he wrote to a friend, quite interestingly, because these are real people. He said, people will be expecting me to pull a rabbit out of my hat for the rest of my life because of all the things that he did right. Well, it's a natural progression. His teachings on nonviolence and equality have inspired so many people for social justice movements worldwide, throughout all of Europe. And this is his world that he came from. His brother, A.D., died shortly after he died in the pool behind the house. Most people don't remember that. And he was a towering political figure. And yet, he could have done all kinds of things. People from all kinds of universities, from Howard University on down, were calling on him, now that he had his doctorate, to work for them, to be a professor. Well, his main thing was, give us the ballot in the South. Give us the ballot. Not the bullets, but the ballot. The power of the vote. And he realized that he could only go so far, but he needed not just not just the support of the people who would be the most affected positively by it, but he needed white support as well. That's where Unitarian Universalists came in. They stayed with him and marched with him and got their heads kicked in when he did. They did everything they could to bring about peace with justice and to change the Jim Crow laws because they believed in it as emphatically as he did. Now that's to your credit. You belong to something that was far more than any spiritual that people speak of. It's a way of urging activists in the crowd to be guided by agape of love and conduct themselves accordingly in a proprietary way important for change in society. And then, his was a very strained and deep loving relationship with Coretta. Many times he told her to shut up. The tension became too great. Did you ever speak to your spouse in a derogatory way because you couldn't speak to people in the public? I think that some of us can relate to some of that. And then we're sorry about it and we wish we didn't do it. But Coretta sat there when somebody from the FBI sent Dr. King, his name was Davis Powers, and they sent Dr. King all the tapes of his moaning in hotel rooms with other women. And the list was long for white and black women. And they said, there's only one thing left for you to do. And you all know what I'm talking about. They were watching him. The FBI had a huge file on him that they have yet to release all of it. And apparently, they wanted to collect enough damage so they could either prosecute him, intimidate him, or drive him to commit suicide. Well, once Coretta Scott King was listening to those tapes with Martin, the first thing she said was that we need to be together in tomorrow's march. J. Edgar Hoover needs to see us walking together. She knew that the movement would be over. Forget about her husband and his unfaithfulness. That it would be over, and J. Edgar Hoover would have accomplished what he set out to do, was to destroy Dr. King. J. Edgar Hoover destroyed a lot of people, by the way. And then there was reports that they put out that have yet to be verified that are going to be listened to, tapes that are going to be revealed 2027, that Dr. King himself forcibly raped a woman in a hotel gathering. A handwritten addendum, they said he looked on and laughed and offered advice to a person who was forcibly abusing a woman. Now, is that true? Well, wait till 2027. What way can we better understand the gap between the public and private Dr. Martin Luther King than if we are basically as honest as we can be? Bayard Rustin worked for Dr. King. Bayard Rustin was gay. And Dr. King didn't have really a position on homosexuality. And Adam Clayton Powell, the congressman from New York, said that he was going to spread the rumor that Bayard Rustin and Martin Luther King Jr. were lovers. And that King accepted Bayard Rustin's resignation from the SCLC. Perhaps that this is what was cold political reality, that in everyone's best interest, that the appearance of impropriety was something we couldn't risk. And he widened his campaign to publicly oppose the Vietnam War. And he previously declined to criticize taking aim less at specific laws than at poverty, inequality, broadly throughout all of the nation. He said racism is genocide in Chicago. And he discovered it's much easier to galvanize resistance to cruel police chiefs than it is to try to get faceless landlords to provide better living accommodations for their tenants. So he realized what the source was that he ought to go after. And then the police, if you notice, the police were caught on to Dr. King's MO. And they found people, as soon as they arrested Dr. King, they would immediately pay for his bail, and he would be involuntarily released. He wanted to stay in. But, and he said, people respond better if I stay in. Well, they knew that they just let him go. Just let him out this way. And all the people that were arrested, let them all go. Let them go. This way, there was a diffusing of the movement. They were on to it, see. Now, it is true, they foreordained his death. One time he was stabbed in the chest by a deranged woman when he was at a book signing in New York. He had attempted suicide as a young child, as a teenager. As an adult, he was hospitalized for exhaustion and depression time and time again. But despite these things, it is disquieting to read of that final speech that he gave, delivered in Memphis. Remember that? Remember the garbage men? The garbage men wanted an increase in their salary because a lot of them were receiving government assistance on welfare because their salaries were so low. Garbage men. And what they, remember the sign they wore? I am a man. That was all it said. I'm a man. And Dr. King felt, no, I have to go there. I have to go there to support them. They asked me to come. Everybody said, don't go, because we're over here. We're over here in Resurrection City. Remember the Poor People's Campaign right next to the Lincoln Memorial? Well, like anybody, he said, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. And the next night on his motel balcony, Dr. King was shot, they say, by James Earl Ray. And I will never agree to that. I'll never say that James Earl Ray, a petty criminal, made his way from Memphis, Tennessee to Canada, to Great Britain, where they caught him, and he was on his way to Rhodesia. No way did he do that. There's nothing that's going to convince me of that. But he was a good patsy. Dr. King was pronounced dead about an hour after he was shot. And his curvature of the moral universe seemed to many people naive. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice, but you have to give your life for it. How long? Not long, he said. Over and over and over again. How long? Because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And he was adamant that his life was irrelevant to the larger picture. And he also asked himself, how long can I keep asking my people to do this? To be jailed, to be beaten, and maybe to be killed. He knew that there was a time when that would have to end. He was a visionary leader who dedicated his life to the pursuit of racial equality and social justice, an unwavering commitment to the principles of equality and justice. He challenged the status quo. How many times have we done that? How many times have you done that? How many times have I done that? His legacy continues to resonate, reminding us of the ongoing struggle, the importance of unity, compassion, and empathy. His dream of a just and equitable world of a society lives on, urging us to carry the torch of the vision. Oh, yes, and work toward a world free from discrimination and oppression. It's a long struggle, civil rights. African Americans have gone from slavery to indentured servants to Jim Crow and second-class citizenship. Much progress is made, has been made, and we have talks of reparation and improvements within our community across the nation. Jim Crow has been abolished. The Voting Rights Act and several other equal opportunity and affirmative action legislations have been sadly, surprisingly, rolled back by a partisan Supreme Court. This leaves people seeking justice to keep working for the marginalized among us. The work goes on. Hope still lives. The cause endures. And the dream shall never die. Thank you.